Hello and welcome to the next episode, the next lesson of Cylinder Radio. Today, my guest is Matt Thornton. Matt Thornton is the founder and president of Straight Blast Gym. It's a major martial arts franchise. He's a 4th degree black belt in Brazilian Jiu JItsu. He understands martial arts. He understands the application of martial arts and the practical uses and how that can be used in overall critical thinking in your life. So Matt's on here, and we're going to talk about violence in the United States and the role that martial arts can play in critical thinking and how it can just affect all aspects of your life in a very positive way. So Matt, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Oh, thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
So there's a lot to get to. I told you a little bit before we were recording that I've had on one of my best childhood friends, Zach Maslany, who's a Nogi Jiu-Jitsu coach. And then I've also had on Clay from Haven Lock, which was we talked a little bit about school shootings and things like that. I think this can kind of encompass a lot of that. But when I say that you're a black belt, a 4th degree black belt in Jiu-Jitsu, for people that don't understand martial arts, that they know the Karate Kid, they know Bruce Lee, they don't understand what Jiu-Jitsu is. I myself have been training for about 10 years off and on, and I'm a purple belt in Jiu-Jitsu. And when I talk to adults about that, sometimes they say, oh, well, my little daughter Susie, she's a brown belt. Maybe you can get a brown belt too someday. It's like, yeah, maybe. How can you explain the art that you've been doing for almost 30 years now, 30 years? How can you explain Jiu-Jitsu and where that falls compared to other martial arts and why it is different than a lot of other martial arts?
Sure. Well, when it comes to martial arts, I've had a policy since I started training about being honest in a blunt way with people about what works and what doesn't work. And one of the problems with martial arts is, which people who don't know much about martial arts probably don't realize, is that with the exception of religion and probably alternative medicine, you'd be hard pressed to find a field that had more bullshit in it than martial arts. And so the first thing I would do is I would distinguish between what I call fantasy-based arts and functional martial arts. And functional martial arts, what they all have in common is it generally is some form of competition. And because they have some form of competition, there's going to be training methods that have some form of aliveness. And when I talk about aliveness, I'm talking about timing, energy, and motion. So you're not dissecting a corpse, as Bruce Lee would say. You don't have somebody that's locking their arm out while someone else does this pre-choreographed 3 or 4 move, 1 and 2 step sparring or kata. But you're actually, if you're engaged, for example, in judo, and you get a throw, you actually threw the other person, and the other person was resisting and trying not to be thrown. Whereas with Aikido, it's all make-believe. Somebody comes forward and pretends to chop you in the head, and then you grab their wrist, and they take a tumble for you. It looks pretty. It looks cool because it's choreographed, and things that are choreographed look cool. But one of them is real, in this case judo, and one of them is make-believe. And I've never found it useful to make words about that. I think a lot of times people like to skirt around the edge of that reality, but I don't think that does anyone any good. And a lot of people end up wasting a lot of time doing things like judo or like Aikido or Wing Chun or some other, silly martial art. And when they eventually find their way to boxing, wrestling, Brazilian Jiu Jitsu, Muay Thai, they're grateful. And they can begin actually training to do the things those other martial arts pretend to do, but are never going to be able to achieve by the very nature of the fact that they're pretending all the time. Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu in that realm, so if you have make-believe martial arts, fantasy-based martial arts, and functional martial arts, which are generally all combat sports, within that realm, you have the arts that I just listed, the kickboxing-based arts. You have the wrestling arts like Western wrestling, also judo, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. And
Sambo, something like that.
Sambo, absolutely. And every culture in the world that's had a warrior society or has had warriors generally has some form of grappling. So there'll be some kind of wrestling system there inherent in it because it's so important. And but of all those arts, jiu-jitsu is unique in the sense that I think it is the most gentle on the body, and you can do it without getting hurt. You can dominate another person technically without causing them pain or injuring them. You know, to dominate another person with boxing, you basically have to hit them in the head. Yeah. With judo, you wind up taking throws. There's of course there's safer and more intelligent ways to do wrestling and judo, and those are beautiful arts. But jiu-jitsu is something where you can take, if you're a good coach, you can take somebody from literally any athletic background, no matter how out of shape they are, whether they've done anything ever in their life, and you can put them on the mat. And on their very first day, they can experience what it's like to roll, which is, you know, as you know, our version of sparring. And that's unique. You can't find that in the other combat sports. And that is something very special. It allows everyone the chance to experience that. And just the human touch, the fact that you're wrestling with another body, and when you escape or you submit someone or you wind up getting submitted, it's real. It has so many benefits that, you know, we could sit here for 3 hours and list all that makes that so cool, and what that can do for people who come to the art with various problems, whether it's social anxiety or claustrophobia, or they were bullied, or any of that kind of stuff. So yeah, that would be my short answer to that question.
Yeah. Have you ever seen the Instagram McDo Joe life?
No.
Oh, it is great. It's all the stuff that you said. It's kind of like religion or like, what would you say, like homeopathic type of, like, there's that kind of, it's like the most extreme of the no touch kung fu masters and all their students just falling over, and people really believe it. And I went through this. When I was a kid, I started when I was in like second grade and went all the way up through until I think I was like 17 years old. I did Tang Soo Do, and I got a black belt. And I realized in high school that just any kid on the football team could beat the crap out of me. And I put in like 8 or 9 years of this. And I actually was worse off than if I would have done nothing. Because then eventually when I went to a Muay Thai gym, my coach was like, "What are you doing?" It's like, "I'm kicking." He's like, "No, that's not what do you do with your hands?" Like, I learned bad moves. And but there's a big difference here, and you touched on it. I want to reiterate, like, imagine going and playing basketball, but you've never done anything besides just shoot from your driveway. Like, you just shot free. You never had defense. You've never actually moved a body. You've never actually fought. But in jiu-jitsu, that's all you do. In wrestling and boxing, like, can you imagine someone having a boxing match and never doing anything besides hitting the bag? Like, well, that's what martial arts, a lot of these martial arts are. And people don't get that. They have this inflated sense of ability, and it's not rooted in anything real. And that can be really startling, because it sucks to learn. For me, it sucked to learn in my mid-20s that, like, I wasted 9 years on something. And I'm sure I could have gotten something beneficial from it. There's got to be something positive, but it's not what you thought it was. So it's very hard to come to terms with that. And people reject that, as they do when anything about their core reality is shaken so fundamentally.
No, that's exactly right. And what you said there is very true. A lot of people don't realize that you're often better off not having any training, but anybody who's coached any of these arts, coached jiu-jitsu or boxing or kickboxing for a while, knows if you have somebody that comes in from a traditional karate background, or you have somebody that has no training whatsoever, you can almost always help the person who has no training whatsoever acquire skill at a much faster pace, because they don't have a lot of stuff they have to unlearn.
Yeah.
They don't have bad habits, you know, and without the aliveness, without the timing, energy, and motion that comes from a resisting training partner, from a resisting opponent, the martial arts very quickly devolve into, you know, a silly kind of choreography, and the timing and the motions and everything about them becomes off. It won't translate when somebody's angry and bigger than you trying to beat you up. So So that's right. And then people have a choice to make when they realize that. Do they then let it go and start to learn something real, or do they hang on to it? Which and I've seen both, and I've never seen anybody that hung on to it wind up have it be something that was healthy for them. So I usually just advise people to just let it go.
Yeah, and that's tough. One of the things that I talk about, because what I'm trying to do with this podcast and in my classes and everything is break people out from their certainty. People are so certain about certain things. Maybe they're certain about the president is wonderful or terrible. Or they're certain about this one ideology or this one specific stance or whatever it is. They're so certain. They don't want to be on shaky ground. And I said, what it would be really fun to do is have like a top tier black belt who's like 140 pounds. And I just want to carry him around like a duffel bag and zip it and have him pop up and be like, all right, to like anyone on the street. How do you think you would do in a fight with this guy? And they'd be like, well, I could beat him up. And then the little guy would beat the big guy up handedly, not even break a sweat, be talking to you through the whole thing. And then the person who got just like completely, not even beaten, not hurt, just completely controlled, would just have to come to terms with like, what just happened? This was impossible 2 minutes ago. So maybe if this is possible, other things are possible. And that could be an in. I would love if I would ever have like an educational seminar or something like that about opening people's minds up. I think I would just want to have a tiny little black belt with me, because the look on people's faces when they experience that, I'm sure you've seen it hundreds of times, where they're just like, what? This can't be real.
Right.
And it is.
Yeah. No, Sam here talked about that, and I forget exactly how he phrased it, which was well and better than I will. But, one of the great values of functional martial arts is, and when you approach critical thinking and skepticism through the lens of martial arts, is it's so provable. It's delusion made manifest. When you see somebody who thinks they can knock people out without touching them, all of a sudden come to the realization that they can't. They're coming into to realize their own delusion in a very physical, very real way. That's hard to match with anything else, whether it's homeopathy or religion or anything else. You can usually make excuses for it, but with this kind of thing, it's very cut and dry. So I think it's very beneficial that way, especially if it's done in a healthy way. And then people can see for themselves how easy it is to be fooled. You'll have guys even that are good boxers or fighters who can get fooled by martial arts trickery in the same way that you could have a good scientist or physicist get fooled by a 2-bit mentalist like Uri Geller. If you're not trained in those specific things, it can look cool and you could be led astray.
Yeah, there's it's also, I think, good for young people out there, because this is going to be a bit of an infomercial on why you should take jiu-jitsu and get into martial arts. But someone was explaining this on my buddy Zach's podcast, and he was saying that when he became a blue belt, he got into some like just tussles, like fun tussles with his friends who never trained before. And he said, it's like that scene in The Matrix where Neo sees the code and the agent's throwing all these punches and he's just like swiping all away. And he's like, this is it? Like this? It's like, just giving me your neck. Oh, okay. And it's just no effort. And the fact that anyone, it doesn't matter how strong you are, it doesn't matter how big you are, you can be a girl, you can be a boy, it doesn't matter, that you can develop that skill. I heard Jocko Willink say it's like a real life superpower. It's like jiu-jitsu is a superpower, which is so cool. And we have the ability to do it, to get to there. Like it kind of boggles my mind why people wouldn't want to do that. It's actually a if I would ever start a school, it would be a requirement that some sort of martial arts. In my house, I have a 5-year-old, just turned 5 yesterday, and a 2-year-old. The 5-year-old's already in it. He's already competing. He loves it. But it's a requirement to have some sort of martial arts training. I think it's that important. And I'm not very dogmatic about a lot of things, but that I am.
Yeah, no, I think that's great.
So getting into like maybe a bigger kind of view of this whole thing is, other than, being a critical thinker and opening your mind up to possibilities, like what is the practical application for learning this? Because don't we have police, and the world is so much safer now than it ever has been before as far as violence goes, and and things like that. Like people might have guns, so you could do you've been doing 30 years of jiu-jitsu, but if I have a Glock, then So what is the practical application other than what we already discussed of learning martial arts?
Sure. So by the time someone gets to blue belt, like your friend that you just mentioned, you're usually able to handle even bigger, stronger people. Unless they also have a grappling background, you're probably going to be able to handle yourself quite well in a typical street fight or self-defense situation. It is almost like a superpower. And from blue belt on, really what you wind up learning is jiu-jitsu versus jiu-jitsu. So you're learning to defend and train against somebody else who knows what you know. And that's an art, and that's a sport, and that's fun. I mean, nobody's going to stick with it for, the average person usually takes 10 to 12 years to get a black belt. Nobody's going to stick with something for 10 to 12 years if it's not fun. So people get addicted to it. Why they get addicted to it and why it's so good for people is because we're animals, we're primates, and we're physical. And it's very easy in a technologically driven society like we now have to lose touch with that kind of primal physical self in a lot of ways that aren't necessarily healthy for you. And when you begin exercising, number one, that makes you start feeling better and having a better life immediately. When you begin exercising with something like this, you also have increased advantages that related to confidence and how you're going to carry yourself and being self-reliant that aren't necessarily available from something like running or lifting weights. Having that push and pull and battle with another human body on the mat that is, like I said, real and not choreographed, benefits the human animal in so many different ways, from stress relief to personal confidence to problem solving. As you know, jiu-jitsu requires a certain intelligence, and you have to oftentimes physically think your way out of problems as opposed to trying to force your way out, especially when you're dealing with another jiu-jitsu practitioner. And all of that has a myriad of benefits that translate off the mat that are really good for people. And, the proof is the students, and I've had the benefit of teaching full time now for almost 30 years, about 28 years. And I've had, I want to say thousands, but certainly hundreds of students come up to me and tell me what a life-changing thing jiu-jitsu has been for them. And
jiu-jitsu saved my life is a very common phrase. I've seen it on shirts and all that stuff. It's
exactly.
Yeah.
And the problems vary, or the issues that it helped them with vary to the degree that human issues vary. But to a person, pretty much jiu-jitsu wound up being something helpful for them. So just getting back in touch with your physicality as a human animal, I think is extraordinarily beneficial.
Yeah, I've turned on some students to it, and it's been huge. The valedictorian of the high school I teach at a couple of years ago, this nerdy math kid, got into it and actually competed before he was graduating and stuff. And his mom was a little worried and stuff, but he did great. And one of my colleagues, a woman at my school, was like, yeah, I think martial arts was good for him. I was like, I think it's good for everybody. She's like, well, I don't know about for me. I was like, no, I think for everybody. I think it would be good for everybody. I'm not telling everyone to go compete and start getting to tournaments and stuff, but just to get in touch with that. I agree with you. I think that's really, really important. And another practical aspect of it that I think is important is people talk about hey, if the zombie apocalypse ever happens or something like that, I would survive. It's you would survive? Well, you don't know how to drive stick. What if the only way out is with a stick shift car? You don't just become capable. This is a process that you have to go over for a long time. I listened to a Radiolab podcast, and they said, if we go dark, lose internet, running water, power, all that stuff, in 72 hours, people are killing their neighbors for food. We go primitive that quickly. And when I talk about, why I own guns, that's a major reason is, I have them locked up in a way, but I don't know. We're so comfortable in 2019. The situation is always what it is. It's so good, but it could go gnarly quick. And are you prepared for that if it does? The vast majority, including probably myself, is not ready. So maybe it's something we should prepare for instead of practical sense.
I agree.
So, have you seen there's a video, and it kind of went viral for a little bit, of a guy in Toontown in Disney World or Disneyland, and he like punched some lady and then punched another lady. Some guy tries to punch him. You've seen that video?
Yes.
That was a startling video for me to watch, because there was probably 100 people just watching this one adult go on a violent rampage. You're in Disneyland, you know he doesn't have a gun or a knife, and you see it.
Right.
And people just didn't know what to do.
Right. I think that's a huge part of it. People are, that's not the environment that you would expect something like that to happen. So people were rightfully shocked and didn't know what to do. I know I have friends of mine that I know, if they were in that situation, would have immediately responded, but they're not the typical person. And so for the average person that doesn't have any physical training and isn't exposed to violence on a regular basis like that, they're not a police officer, those kind of things can be shocking. And the better our society gets, it's almost a catch-22. But you did mention there are peaks and valleys, and there are areas where violence in the United States has gotten worse, but generally speaking, generation after generation, we get less violent and safer as humans. And a lot of people are removed from violence. So when they see it at Disneyland, they're just not going to know what to do.
Yeah, even the people who are around violence. I used to teach in a very tough area of Los Angeles and a lot of gang violence and things. And when I offered teaching boxing and some jiu-jitsu after school, a bunch of kids came, and I asked them, I said, do you get in fights a lot? Because they would always come in black eyes, like, yeah, all the time. Like, why are you so bad at it? Like, wouldn't you want to get better at something that you're doing all the time and sucks? And they're like, yeah, good point. So I taught them like just basic like takedowns and position to get to mount and stuff like that. And like they even if you're around violence a lot, like people aren't good at it. And not to make a joke about this, but like these kids oftentimes had access to firearms and things like that. They were horrible shots. And usually, thank God, but sometimes not, because I've had a lot of students, this is very unfortunate, I'm not making a joke out of it, but a lot of students who were shot and they weren't even near the intended target.
Right.
So, there is violence in these pockets, but it's so inefficient and so kind of chaotic.
Yes. Like, it's just young boys shooting other young boys.
Yeah. Yeah. It's really sad. Yeah.
Half the time, my friends who are officers in some of those neighborhoods that wind up confiscating those weapons will find that they're loaded with the wrong ammunition, dangerous just to shoot, And like you said, fortunately, most of the time they miss and they don't hit anybody. And thanks in large part to increases in technology, as well as the veterans that have been returning from the Middle East, the success rate in the ERs is incredible. So even if you did get shot, I think the chances of it being fatal are 3% or less in most of the big urban areas, as long as they get you to an ER. So we handle gunshot wounds really, really well. I'm not sure how good of a thing that is, but we do. But they have absolutely no idea what they're doing with guns or otherwise.
Were you saying that that veterans come back from dealing with bullet wounds over there and then they don't come into the ERs? I didn't know that. That's interesting.
No, I'm not saying they don't come into the ER. I'm saying they'll continue their work maybe as a nurse in the ER, and they just have a lot of experience dealing with gunshot wounds. So that's part of it's just we're getting better with our technology. But we have a generation of nurses and males and females that served overseas and dealt with gunshot wounds in a way that maybe some of the past generations had not, at least recently. So they have more experience. But the survival rate is incredible in the United States if you get shot.
Yeah. So what would, because I like to try and give both sides, but I think I'm just going to be in agreement with you on just about everything. But because of the nature of this show, like what would be, I think people might even have tuned out of this and they go, I'm here to learn about, abortion or learn about immigration. Karate classes, come on. This is not a big deal. This is not like we're losing track of what's important here, blah, 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 blah. Okay. We should be worried about, gang violence and school shootings. If we're going to talk about violence, not get into your kimono and roll it around on the floor with a bunch of other sweaty people. Where do you make the connection between martial arts, learning how to defend yourself, getting familiar with some form of violence in a controlled environment, and how that will have positive impacts on society as a whole. Because I think that's really at the core of what we're going to talk about here.
Sure. Okay. But at the individual level, I think that the benefits and reasons behind training functional martial arts, and especially something that's as gentle, can be in the right environment, as gentle and healthy as jiu-jitsu, Brazilian jiu-jitsu, I should say, are obvious. At a meta level, societal level, it's not quite as obvious. But one thing I've written quite a bit about, anybody, in my opinion, anybody who looks at the data, in particular in the United States as it relates to violence, problematic violence, criminal violence in the United States, and does not conclude that maturity, and by maturity I mean a lack of maturity, exists at the heart of that, I don't think has understood the data. So if you take gunshots as an example, I think everybody knows now that the vast majority of gun crime in the United States occurs from handguns. It doesn't occur from rifles or assault weapons or any machine guns or anything like that. It's just handguns. And of those shootings related to handguns, more than half occur in about 5 zip codes. And in those 5 zip codes, that more than half is generally a demographic in the United States that's less than 4%. And what I mean by that is you're talking about young black males have, for the last 40 years, been responsible for almost 50% of all the homicides every single year. Their victims are also young black males. Those are young men shooting other young men in about 5 or 6 zip codes in the United States over petty things related to issues of status, not a lot of money. So even when we're talking about drugs, and you're talking about Burger King wages for these drugs, they're not drug kingpins. And they make up about 50% of all the homicide victims in this country. And when you remove those shootings from the data, the United States looks an awful lot like Canada and a lot of the countries in Western Europe. And so then you have to say, well, what's going on in those neighborhoods? And you can control, if anybody who's really serious about finding an answer to that and isn't just trying to confirm their own dogma or their own ideological bias, is going to want to control for things like poverty and unemployment and all of those different issues. You can control for all of that, and you can still see an exceptional level of violence in these zip codes with that fixed demographic. And what you find, or what I believe the answer to that is a lack of fathers in the home. So you'll see the out-of-wedlock birth rate in the African-American community in the United States is around 72, 73%. That's nationwide. But when you go into the areas where the shootings are most prevalent, like New Orleans about a decade ago had a homicide rate that was higher than El Salvador during the war, you'd find that their out-of-wedlock birth rate is going to be in the high 90s if you go to those hospitals. And so the vast majority of these young men who are shooting other young men have no fathers in the home. They're shooting other young men who have no fathers in the home, and over petty issues related to status. And we can talk about access to handguns. In most of these areas, they're illegal anyway. They're certainly illegal for a minor who's a felon. Most of them have one felony already. So it's already illegal for them, but we could talk about limiting that kind of access. But ultimately, I think you have to address the problem of the need young men have for strong fathers in the home. And in the absence of having a strong father in the home, there needs to be some mentors that they respect who can help keep them on the track. And if you don't have enough fathers in a given neighborhood, and you don't have enough strong males in a given neighborhood to help lead the young men, then you're going to wind up with gang problems, and you're going to wind up needing to hire an awful lot more police officers to control the violence. It's predictable. You can see it time and time again. And it's not just the United States. It's worldwide. And I think anyone that looks at the data ultimately, honestly, is going to have to come to that conclusion. And then the question becomes, how do we fix a problem like that? And the best answer I have at a day-to-day level that all of us can participate in is being a mentor for young men in areas like this, like what you talked about doing at your school. And And having a jiu-jitsu program or a boxing program at that school where young men can come, they can do something that is masculine, they can do something where they can apply their energy and their frustration and their anger, where they can get some sense of self-esteem and some sense of self-worth, and they can have someone, most importantly, you or whoever's leading the class, that they can look to as a model for what being a man means. That's not just another peer next to him who also has no idea what it means. Then I think you can make a difference, a big difference. And so in that way, having functional martial arts programs, whether it's jiu-jitsu or boxing or wrestling clubs in a lot of these neighborhoods for a lot of these kids is massive in terms of how well it will help them. Because what it does, what combat martial arts do, and what all good sports do, is they help you mature. And that, if we define maturity as a lack of self-awareness, empathy, and impulse control, that really lies at the heart of about half, like I said, of all violent conflict within this country.
Yeah, there's so much there. Thank you for going into that, because there's so much there that is really important. And that's why I like having educated and informed guests that can lay this stuff out. So it's not just me saying this to the audience over and over again. Look, it's not racist to say that this is the demographic where this stuff is occurring. And if you start throwing that out there, because of these culture wars and stuff like that, social justice stuff, you are not going to be able to fix the problem. You have to understand what the problem is. And if you try to solve a problem that you don't understand, you could very easily make it worse. And that's what we're seeing, is we're not addressing what it is. We're aiming to help. This is horribly sad. I've been in this situation. I have lost students. It is horribly sad. And I want to try and stop it. And unless we address it, what it is, this is important. Toxic masculinity with that Gillette commercial and stuff was all over the conversations, a couple months ago. And it's not factually correct. It's not dads telling their sons, go out and hurt people. That's the problem. It's the lack of fathers, just like you said. And these kids growing up with testosterone starts pumping through their veins, and they go, what do I do with this? And they have no idea. So they look at their peers who also have no idea, and they're just going out and doing just bad stuff or nonsense, whatever, and they start going into it. And this is supported by data. This is supported from anecdotal evidence that I've experienced and things like that. I couldn't agree with you more that male role models are crucially important. And if the government wants to invest money in helping these communities, you don't just throw money at it. That's not helping it. But if you invest in building more martial arts schools, more after-school programs and stuff, and get people in there, and we as individuals need to step up. If you really care, if you are someone who says, I care about these kids in the hood, then go into the hood and help. The Big Brothers, Big Sisters foundations, they need help. I did that through college. It was a great experience. Just go in, take these kids to baseball games, teach them stuff. It will help. It will absolutely help. But unless you are willing to get out of, not you, Matt, unless you are willing to get out of your kind of comfort bubble, which most people are listening to on this podcast in, and go out and volunteer somewhere and help people, help them play basketball, help them learn how to box, help them, with their homework, anything. But you really got to teach them the ways of being a man. This is deeply rooted in our genetics of how to become a protector and provider and all those more traditional male roles, that they're lost. And we're setting them up we're just setting them up for failure. And that's really, really tragic.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more with everything you said. And the problem, one of the many problems, is that as a society, when you look at the cultural groupthink mainstream, it's going just the opposite direction. It seems like the media and Hollywood and entertainment at large downplays the role of fathers, mitigates the necessity for fathers in the home. There's a lot of different political activists that have a dog in that race, and data that talks about, that supports how important it is to have a male role model in the home, especially when you have young men there, tends to get downplayed, not mentioned, not discussed, ridiculed. The concept of marriage gets ridiculed a lot by people on the left, and regardless of what your politics are, and I'm personally, it's not a big secret, I'm an atheist, and I'm not a fan of religion. But I think we do society as a whole a great disservice when we start ridiculing things like the importance of two parents in the home and the importance of having a man in the home when you have young men there. And that is in no way, shape, or form to say anything insulting about single mothers. In fact, if I was going to insult single mothers, the best way I could do it would be to minimize the importance of a father in the home, because that just minimizes the job that they're having to do. A single mom now has a really tough job. It's a really tough job because it's a job that often requires a father and a mother, and now they have to do both. And I appreciate and respect that, and of course the vast majority of single mothers do a great job. But you're not saying anything good about single mothers when you minimize the role of fathers. You're actually making light of the actual work that they have to put in.
Yeah, I agree with you, because I think that is where a lot of this comes from, is the defense of, like, so you're saying that a single mom can't raise a good kid? No,
right.
Not what we're saying at all. But is it better to have a kid raised in a loving household? Like, probably. It's probably better. Is it better to have like a abusive alcoholic father than no father? Probably not. But that's not, like, you can't take these extreme examples. We're just talking about, like, what is ideal. It gives us something to aim for, at least. When you mentioned being an atheist, I did a podcast with a pastor, a Christian pastor, and one of the things that I talked about in that podcast is what religion has, in a very practical sense, that I think even atheists such as yourself would agree with, is the idea of community. Is even if you take away the Bible and the scripture and all that kind of stuff from Jewish communities or Hindu communities, whatever it is, the fact that you come together and there's a support group when you're struggling is something that's deeply rooted in religious practice for a very practical reason. And that is also being lost, is just the feeling of a positive community that's going to be there to uplift you. That's something that's needed. And if if there isn't a father in the home, there's going to be guys at the church, or guys at, whatever your church is, whatever your group is, whatever your community is. The lack of community is really, really big.
No, that's 100% true. And going back to jiu-jitsu and your initial question, that's also one of the things that I hear a lot from people, because to get good at jiu-jitsu, to become a decent player, you have to come a couple days a week usually and train a couple days a week. So you're going to be coming 2-3 days a week on average to, a school and rolling around competitively in a physical way where you have to be vulnerable in the sense that you're putting yourself in a position where the other person could break your arm or choke you unconscious if they didn't release when you tapped. Day after day, and you get to know these people, you get to become friends with these people, you establish relationships with this big group of people, and even if you don't hang out outside the gym, it becomes a community that helps people in all the ways that you just talked about. And with the decline of people going to church and having those kind of communities in their own neighborhood, I think things like jiu-jitsu schools, or it doesn't have to be jiu-jitsu, but can wind up playing such an important role because they become now the person's extra community. There's a huge, any thriving gym that's doing well has at its very core a culture that encourages community. And if you go there, you're going to find a strong community of people who like each other and hang out with each other and enjoy each other's company and like to wrestle with each other. And that's part of what makes a successful gym. If you can't put together an environment that facilitates that, you probably won't do that well. You won't have that many students. And that is also, like, for all the reasons you just said, so important.
Yeah, many of my best friends, we have had wars with each other. I love the book Tribe by Sebastian Junger, and talks about how these military units, they're just, firefighters and cops and soldiers, because they're in the shit, so to speak, like they form these tight bonds. And jiu-jitsu is like, it's the closest thing you can get to combat without like having your life at risk. But when someone slaps a choke on you and you tap them, if they choose not to let go, they can kill you. And
Right.
there's a level of trust there that you form with these people. For anyone listening who's really struggling socially, especially guys, because girls is a whole kind of different thing. And not saying that jiu-jitsu is not open to you, it absolutely is. But for men, especially young men, if you're struggling socially, go down to your jiu-jitsu gym, introduce yourself. I've met a lot of people in the jiu-jitsu community who just embrace these kind of social, awkward kids and outcasts. Come on in, come be a part of this, and you will find your tribe. You really will at a martial arts gym. You have to confront that dragon. I have my little sign back here, Dragon's Sword Gold. The gold is being protected by something scary. And it's scary to walk into some of these gyms with these monsters in there who look really scary and intimidating. And their ears are all cauliflowered up and stuff. But you'll confront it, and it'll pay off. It'll pay off in beautiful ways in your life. I believe that.
Absolutely.
So the last thing I do want to talk about, because if we're talking about violence in America, is one of the areas of violence that is on a real like hockey stick is mass shooting. Mm-hmm. So I have talked about it a little bit on here. My theory on this, I'm just going to give you a short version of it, and I want to hear your thoughts on it. My thoughts are that it stems from nihilism, that kids today, adults today, they wake up in the morning and they feel like life doesn't matter. And if they disappeared, nothing would really change. So they don't matter. So you might as well kill yourself. But even if you kill yourself, you make the ultimate power move or your statement, no one cares, then no one's going to care if you kill yourself. So you want to matter in the world. And it's much easier to matter in a negative way than a positive way. And I tell this to my class. I'm like, you guys in here, within 1 hour, you could be remembered for generations. Just go outside and do something horrible, and you'll be remembered to many people's lives for something horrible. I don't recommend it. But if you want to make an impact on this world, you're so angry at society, you just say, screw this whole thing, F this whole thing. I want to matter. Because I saw Nicholas Cruz, the Parkland shooter, and he was on his phone talking to it, and he said, my name is Nicholas Cruz. You don't know who I am, but you will. And this is the day before he did the shooting. So I'm thinking that it stems from the lack of purpose in a lot of people's lives. So they just want to do something negative. They're angry at this world, and they want to do something to have some sort of impact and things like that. That's what I'm guessing it's from. Life has gotten almost too easy, but I don't know. It's just kind of a hypothesis I have. But I'm curious, you're probably giving more thought to this and understand these concepts better than I do. So what are your thoughts on, you're older than me too. So you've seen, this change coming probably from an earlier time of that this mass shooting thing is really something that we should be looking at and trying to figure out. I'm curious what your thoughts are on it.
Yeah, well, I agree with everything you said. I don't know the answer to why they do it. I don't know that there's also going to be one unified answer. I think it's probably more than likely a variation of responses as to why they do it. I also am not completely convinced that that this is an out of control new phenomenon. I think when you actually look at the data and go back, you'll find that incidents like this have existed throughout time historically. What's different now is 24-hour news cycle, CNN, Fox, MSNBC, all of which I think plays to wanting to be famous, which is part of what you were talking about. And you can responses to social scientists have put out questionnaires for existing college students asking what they want to be, and oftentimes famous is the first thing that comes up as opposed to anything else. And so all of that I think can play into the problem. From a solution standpoint, I think we have to focus on access. It's not to say that understanding the root of what's going on in the mind of some of these people isn't important. I do think it's important, but if you're gonna make people safe, you have to focus on access, and that means focusing at the points of entry and making sure that it's just hard to get in somewhere and walk around unnoticed when you're carrying around a gun. And so with schools, we're talking about how you get in, how you get out, having fences, and controlling who has access to those kids. And anytime we get serious about security, anytime security matters, that's what it comes down to. And so we as a society have to ask, where do we want to draw the line? We don't want our schools to look like prisons,
Right.
but at the same time, you don't want to allow a mentally ill or evil person who's just looking for fame to be able to walk through an unsecured back door of a cafeteria carrying a military-sized duffel bag filled with explosives and assault rifles, or whatever, handguns and shotguns, or machetes for that matter, because it's not about the tool, and start walking through a school slaughtering people. And so controlling access, I think, is ultimately the answer to this problem. If you remember back to 9/11, after the hijackers first took the planes, and that was a relatively new phenomenon that a lot of people hadn't even considered as far as a weapon, people came up with all kinds of creative ideas. But what was most important was what the airlines did first, because it was in their economic interest to make sure they secured the airline travel, and that was secure the cockpit doors, and then change the behavioral patterns of the flight attendants so that they weren't coming in and out of the cockpit all the time to give coffee. You'll notice anytime a pilot has to go to the bathroom, they put the food cart in front, and there's a person there, and the door's locked. It's basically just a split second where the pilot comes out, and then there's a physical barrier. They use the bathroom, the door's locked. So you can't get into the cockpit. The cockpit doors are reinforced. It's very hard. You're not gonna be able to kick one down. And so more than having a air marshal on every flight, more than arming pilots, more than all the psychological background checks that we could have run on potential customers, reinforcing those cockpit doors and changing the behavioral patterns of the people that worked on the airplanes was the single most important thing. And you'll notice we haven't had an incident like that since. And so I think, we have to focus on access.
Yeah, that's a really, and that's little stuff that, like, I've never even noticed that. Those are little things that don't disrupt you much. Yeah, I mean, now you have to wait in line a little bit longer and stuff like that, but you move on. Okay, it's fine. It's like when they first started seatbelt laws, it's like, oh, this is such a pain. It's like, now you don't even think about it. Like, we can make these adjustments. That's being progressive. Like, that's how we do this stuff. We just have to look for these small things, these small changes that we can make, and be willing to try it. But they have to be well thought out. And I think that a lot of people push back against progressive ideas because they're just not well thought out. Like, we're just pushing, trying to bulldoze this through. It's like, wait a second, if I can poke a hole into this right away, there's some problems here. Let's try and think this through a little bit.
Right.
Yeah. So we've done an hour, Matt. Thank you. I could definitely keep talking to you again, and maybe we can do this again sometime. I would love to.
Anytime.
Where can people find out what you're up to? You're a really interesting guy. I went to your blog and just was reading through it, and there's a lot of really cool stuff there. But where can people find you, see what you're up to, and what's coming from you, in the future, so we can keep tabs on that?
Sure. For martial arts, it's straightblastgym.com, and that's our worldwide organization. We have gyms all over the world. I have 30 of my own black belts, many of whom have gone on to accomplish things much better than I have, much bigger scale than I have in our sport, all of which I'm very proud of. So they can go to straightblastgym.com and check that out. For my own writing, like my blog and this particular podcast and other media things that I do, they can check out mattthornton.org. And I usually try and archive everything up there. We recently, last year, put up SBG University, which is an online university for people who want to train with our material but aren't near a gym. They can log on there, and my classes that I teach here in Portland, Oregon, go up there weekly so people can kind of keep up. And then last but not least, I have a book that should be coming out sometime soon. I don't have a publication date or anything like that for you, but on all the topics we discussed as it relates to violence that I've been working on for about 5 years. And when that hits the marketplace, I'll definitely be all over social media to tell everybody about it.
Beautiful. What better, problem? I love tackling problems and trying to solve them. What bigger problem than trying to understand and minimize violence in America? Like, that's the number one. That's always the number one. So getting information about that from someone who has done the work and everything like that, I think is just unbelievably valuable. So we'll definitely keep our eyes open for that. But Matt Thornton, thank you so much for being here, and
Thank you.
hope to talk again soon.
Thank you very much.
Bye.